It is the longest battle of the Second World War, and it lasts 2,074 days. By the time it ends, it has killed 72,000 sailors and sent 3,500 merchant ships to the bottom of the ocean. It runs from a September night in 1939 to the final week of the war in May 1945, and by the time it ends, the outcome of the entire war has already been decided. Not at Stalingrad, not at Alamein, not on the beaches of Normandy, but in the cold black water of the North Atlantic, 3,000 miles wide, where the average man overboard survived 15 minutes before the sea took him. Winston Churchill would later write that only one thing during the entire war ever truly frightened him. Not the Blitz, not invasion, not the fall of France, the U-boat peril. To understand why, we have to go back to a summer evening in 1939 and a ship that was never supposed to be a target. September 3rd, 1939, 9 o'clock in the evening. The SS Athenia is steaming west, 250 miles northwest of Ireland, carrying 1,400 souls civilians, women, children, American tourists trying to get home before the war caught up with them. Britain had declared war on Germany 9 hours earlier. At 19 minutes past 9, a torpedo hit her port side. She listed, she burned, and she took 14 hours to sink. 118 people died in the black Atlantic water that night, and the war at sea was 9 hours old. The captain of the submarine that fired the torpedo, Fritz Julius Lemp, believed he was firing at an armed merchant cruiser. He was wrong, but it did not matter, because on that September night, in international waters, a doctrine that had been quietly perfected for 4 years finally reached the ocean, and the doctrine belonged to one man. His name was Karl Dönitz. Historian Mark Milner, in his 2005 study of the campaign, calls him the most dangerous single mind Britain would face in the entire war. Not Rommel, not Kesselring, not even Hitler, Dönitz. Because Dönitz understood something the Royal Navy had forgotten. Britain in 1939 was not really a country. Britain was an appetite. 55 million tons of imports every year, 68% of her food, 100% of her oil, every rifle round, every tin of beef, every drop of aviation fuel that kept the RAF airborne, all of it arrived by ship. Cut the ships, and the country dies. Not in years, in weeks. The mathematics were ruthless. Britain, at any given moment, held about 3 weeks of food in her granaries. If merchant shipping losses exceeded 600,000 tons a month, sustained for 6 months, the calculation ended. There was no army to defeat, no invasion to launch. The island simply starved into surrender. Dönitz knew this, and he had spent his entire career preparing for it. Under the Versailles Treaty, Germany was forbidden from building submarines. So through the 1920s, Dönitz and his officers worked through shell companies. In the Netherlands and Spain, designing boats they were not allowed to own. By 1935, Hitler tore up the treaty. By 1939, Dönitz had a fleet. Not a large one, only 57 U-boats in total, of which just 22 were capable of ocean patrol. But he did not need a large fleet. He needed a system. And the system was called the Rudel tactic. The Wolf Pack? Coordinated attacks by multiple boats on a single convoy, radioed sightings, night surface tactics, submarines that were faster on the surface than the destroyers hunting them, submarines that struck, dived, and vanished before the escorts could arrive. The Royal Navy did not believe it would work. They had a piece of technology called ASDIC. We call it sonar today. It could detect a submerged submarine at 1,000 yards. The Admiralty believed in 1939 that ASDIC had solved the submarine problem forever. They were wrong, because Dönitz's boats did not attack submerged. They attacked on the surface. At night, low silhouettes cutting through the wave crests, invisible to sonar, because they were not underneath the water at all. The Royal Navy was preparing to fight the last war. Dönitz was preparing to end this one. His plan required 40,000 tons of merchant shipping sunk every day, and for that, he calculated he needed 300 U-boats. He had 57, and he was going to build the rest under fire. In the first 6 months of the war, U-boats sank 420,000 tons of Allied shipping. The Royal Navy lost one aircraft carrier, HMS Courageous, torpedoed in the western approaches. 1,500 crew on board. 518 dead. Then, On the night of October 14, 1939, a young U-boat commander named Günter Prien took his boat U-47 through a gap in the anti-submarine defenses of Scapa Flow. Scapa Flow was the home base of the British Grand Fleet, the safest anchorage in the Empire. The place where the German High Seas Fleet had scuttled itself in 1919. Prien fired 7 torpedoes. He sank the battleship HMS Royal Oak at her mooring. 835 sailors drowned in their bunks, and more than half of them were teenagers. The German propaganda machine called Prien the Bull of Scapa Flow. Churchill, standing in the House of Commons 2 weeks later, called it a most remarkable feat of arms, but privately, in the smoke-filled rooms of the Admiralty, the meaning was different. If Prien could sail a submarine into Scapa Flow and sink a battleship at her mooring, then there was no safe harbor left. The Atlantic was open, and the mathematics of starvation had begun. By the summer of 1940, everything changed. France fell in 6 weeks, and when France fell, the entire coastline from the Bay of Biscay to the English Channel fell with it. Donitz walked into ports he could not have dreamed of a year earlier. Lorient, Brest, Saint-Nazaire, La Palliche, Bordeaux, deep water harbors, only a few hundred miles from the Atlantic convoy lanes. Overnight, his U-boats no longer had to sail around the top of Scotland to reach the killing grounds. They could leave a French port on Monday and be sinking ships by Wednesday. The patrol range doubled. The kill rate tripled. The U-boat crews had a name for what came next: Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. From June 1940 to March 1941, Allied merchant losses climbed month after month until the number crossed 400,000 tons in a single 30-day period. Historian Jonathan Dimbleby, in his 2015 account of the campaign, describes Churchill in these months as a man who could not sleep, pacing the war rooms at 3 in the morning, demanding tonnage figures the moment they came in, knowing that every number on that ledger was a ship, and every ship was 100 men and 1,000 tons of food, somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. The U-boat Command War Diary, kept in Donitz's own headquarters, recorded the mood on the German side. In October 1940, after a single wolf pack of 6 boats destroyed 20 ships out of a convoy of 30 in one night, the entry reads, "The enemy has no answer. This will decide the war by summer. Convoy SC-7, 35 ships bound for Liverpool with grain and steel from Nova Scotia. Lost 20 of them in 30 hours. Convoy HX-79. A follow-up convoy sent to reinforce the route. Lost 12 more within 48 hours. 46 ships gone in 1 week. A young U-boat commander named Otto Kretschmer sank more Allied tonnage than any other submarine captain of the entire war. 273,000 tons. Before he was captured in March 1941, Günter Prien, the Bull of Scapa Flow, vanished with all 45 hands off the coast of Iceland. The same month, Joachim Schepke, another of the top 3 aces, was killed the same week when his conning tower was rammed by a British destroyer. 3 of Germany's most dangerous submarine commanders lost in 7 days. But the losses did not slow Donitz down. He was building faster than he was losing. By the end of 1941, the German shipyards were turning out 20 new U-boats every month. The wolf pack was doubling in size. And then, on December 7, 1941, the war got wider. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. 4 days later, Hitler declared war on the United States. Donitz did not wait. Within 72 hours, he ordered every long-range U-boat he had to sail west. Not toward Britain, toward America. Toward the unlit coastline, the peacetime shipping lanes, the tankers still burning navigation lights at night, the American cities that had not yet learned to be afraid of the dark. He called the operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat, and it was about to become the second happy time. January 13, 1942. The first 5 U-boats of Operation Drumbeat arrived off the eastern seaboard of the United States. What they found was almost unbelievable. American coastal cities were still lit up. Miami, Atlantic City, Norfolk, Jacksonville, neon signs on the boardwalks, streetlights on the promenades, lighthouses running full brightness. Every merchant tanker heading north from the Gulf refineries to New York was silhouetted against a wall of American light, like a target on a shooting range. The U-boat commanders could not believe what they were seeing. Reinhard Hardigan, captain of U-123, wrote in his log that he could see the glow of Manhattan from 30 miles offshore. He sank 2 ships in one night off the coast of Long Island. His crew watched the burning oil light up the New York skyline. For 6 months, the slaughter along the American coast was worse than anything that had happened in the Atlantic proper. 609 ships went down between January and August 1942. 3.5 million tons. More tonnage lost off the coast of the United States than in the entire Battle of Britain in the air. American cities refused to black out. Business owners in Miami argued that a blackout would hurt the tourist season. The lights stayed on. Sailors died within sight of the beach. By the spring of 1942, Dönitz had over 300 U-boats in commission, and he was ready for the phase of the war he had been building toward his entire career. The Mid-Atlantic. There was a stretch of ocean, roughly 600 miles wide, that lay beyond the range of any land-based aircraft flying from Newfoundland, Iceland, or the British Isles. The Allies called it the Black Pit. The Germans called it das Todesloch, the Death Hole. Inside the Black Pit, convoys had no air cover, only surface escorts, and the wolf packs knew exactly where the coverage ended. They would follow a convoy for days, waiting for it to cross the invisible line where the planes turned back. Then they would attack in coordinated waves. 6 boats, 8 boats, sometimes 12, converging on a single convoy from every direction across 1,000 square miles of black water. By November 1942, Allied shipping losses hit the worst month of the entire war, 860,000 tons, the equivalent of 143 ships, in 30 days. Churchill later wrote that this was the moment he came closest to losing hope. Britain's food reserves fell below 8 weeks. Fuel reserves fell below 2 months. The Admiralty began seriously discussing the possibility that convoys might have to stop sailing altogether, not because they were losing ships, but because they were running out of ships to lose. And then came the winter of 1943. The convoys got bigger, the wolf packs got bigger, and the Mid-Atlantic turned into the largest submarine battle in human history. In March 1943 alone, 108 Allied merchant ships were sunk. 2 convoys, HX-229 and SC-122, merged in a storm in the middle of the Black Pit and were attacked by 40 U-boats over 4 days. 22 ships went to the bottom. The Admiralty called it the crisis of the Atlantic War, and this is the point where every history book, every documentary, every popular retelling says the same thing. Bletchley Park broke the Enigma code. The Allies read the U-boat traffic. Convoys were rerouted around the wolf packs. Ultra-intelligence saved the Atlantic. It is a good story. It is a famous story. It is not the whole story, and it is not even the most important part. The traditional history of the Battle of the Atlantic is a history of code breakers. The narrative is neat and satisfying. At Bletchley Park, in a Victorian country house north of London, a team of mathematicians and cryptographers led by Alan Turing broke the German naval Enigma cipher. The Allies could read Dönitz's orders almost as fast as his own captains could. Convoys were routed around the wolf packs. The U-boats found empty ocean where they expected 60 ship convoys. The submarine war was won. The story says, in a room full of clacking machines and teacups. But historian Mark Milner, in his 2005 study of the campaign, pointed out something the codebreaker romance obscures. Ultra-intelligence was decisive at moments. It was never decisive on its own. Because between February 1942 and December 1942, for almost a full year, the Germans changed the Enigma settings, and Bletchley Park went blind. For 10 months, the Allies could not read a single U-boat message, and the worst losses of the entire war happened during exactly those months. The narrative does not survive contact with the calendar. So, what actually turned the Battle of the Atlantic? 3 things. None of them happened at Bletchley Park. The first was American industrial mathematics. Henry Kaiser, a construction magnate in California, took over the shipyards on the West Coast and applied assembly line techniques from the automobile industry to the building of merchant ships. The result was the Liberty ship, a 10,000-ton merchant vessel, welded instead of riveted, built to a single standardized design. At the start of the war, it took American shipyards 230 days to build a merchant ship. By 1943, Kaiser's yards were launching a Liberty ship every 42 days. By 1944, one yard in Portland launched a Liberty ship in 4 days, 15 hours. In 29 minutes, as a publicity stunt, Dönitz could sink 500,000 tons of shipping a month. America was launching 1.5 million. The mathematics that had once favored the U-boats flipped. The second was the Very Long-Range Liberator, an American B-24 bomber, modified with extra fuel tanks in the bomb bay, that could fly a patrol out from Iceland or Newfoundland, deep into the Black Pit, and back again. In April 1943, for the first time in the war, the Mid-Atlantic air gap closed. There was no more dark corner of the ocean. A U-boat surfacing to charge its batteries at night could suddenly find a 4-engined bomber coming out of the clouds, with radar and depth charges. The third was the escort carrier, a cheap merchant hull with a flight deck welded on top, carrying 20 aircraft, sailing in the middle of the convoy. Convoy defense became convoy offense. Hunter-killer groups, small task forces built around an escort carrier and a handful of destroyers, began actively seeking out the wolf packs, instead of waiting to be attacked. May 1943, Dönitz sent his boats out for what he expected to be the largest wolf pack attack of the war. In 30 days, he lost 41 U-boats, 1 in 3 of every submarine at sea. On May 24, 1943, Karl Dönitz ordered every remaining U-boat in the mid-Atlantic to withdraw. He wrote in his war diary that night, "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic." He never sent them back in force. The submarine war was decided, not by cryptography, but by arithmetic, by steel plate output, by aviation fuel range, by the number of aircraft you could put on a flight deck. In the middle of the ocean, Ultra helped. Ultra mattered. But Ultra did not build the Liberty ships. Ultra did not fly the Liberators. Ultra did not launch the escort carriers. The war beneath the Atlantic was won by the war above the assembly line. And by the middle of 1943, with the U-boats retreating, the Allies were finally free to turn their attention to a beach in Normandy that no one had yet crossed. The war did not end for the U-boat crews when Dönitz called them home. It ended for most of them at the bottom of the ocean. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in the German U-boat force during the Second World War, around 30,000 did not come back, a 75% fatality rate, the highest of any branch of any military in the entire war, higher than the Wehrmacht infantry on the Eastern Front, higher than the Japanese Imperial Navy, higher than the air crews of Bomber Command over Germany. Most of the dead were young men, 19, 20, 22, sealed inside pressure hulls that became coffins the moment the depth charges started. Historian Timothy Mulligan, who studied the U-boat personnel records in the German Naval Archives, found that the average U-boat crewman in 1944 was 20.5 years old. Half of them had never seen combat before their first patrol. 2 out of 3 would not survive it. Their letters home, written on the last night in port, sealed in canvas mail sacks, sometimes never reached the addresses on the envelopes, because the boats they came off went down before the mail plane took off. Dönitz himself signed condolence letters to the mothers of these boys. For another 2 years after May 1943, he kept ordering the boats out. He kept knowing they would not return. By the end of the war, 784 U-boats had been lost at sea. The wrecks are still down there, along the western approaches of Britain, along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, along the coasts of Norway and the Bay of Biscay. There are more submarine graves than in any ocean on Earth. For the merchant marine crews, the numbers were even harder to bear. Because they were not soldiers. They were civilians in uniform, carrying cargo, paid by the voyage, unarmed on ships that could not shoot back. 36,000 British merchant seamen died, 9,500 Americans, 1,200 Canadians, sailors from Norway, Greece, the Netherlands, Poland, India, Panama. If your ship went down in the middle of the North Atlantic in February, your survival time in the water was measured not in hours, but in minutes, 15 minutes if you were young, 10 if you were older. The convoys carried the men to the beaches of Normandy. But someone had to carry the food and the fuel and the ammunition first, across 3,000 miles of ocean, in the dark, in the cold, in ships they knew might not make it. When the war ended, The sea kept the score, and the long shadow of the Battle of the Atlantic did not end in 1945. It shaped every naval doctrine of the Cold War that followed. The nuclear submarines of the United States and the Soviet Union descended directly from the German-type Wannineufbau, a revolutionary submarine design that came too late to save Donitz, but was studied, copied, and refined by every major navy on Earth for the next 40 years. The choke points Donitz targeted in 1940, the Denmark Strait, the Iceland Gap, the western approaches to Britain, became the same choke points NATO patrolled against Soviet submarines for the entire duration of the Cold War. The same ocean, the same maps, the same anxiety. And the merchant convoy system, the geometry of escort and column and zigzag, is the direct ancestor of every container shipping route that moves 80% of world trade today. Every phone, every car, every pair of shoes shipped across an ocean follows a line first traced by men who did not know if they would live to see the next port. There are 12 maritime choke points on Earth, through which almost all global trade must pass. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Dover Strait, the same choke points, more or less, that Donitz drew on a wall map in Lorient in 1940. In 1941, Britain lived 21 days from starvation. In 2026, most modern economies hold about 6 days of supply for their major cities. The just-in-time logistics that make a smartphone cheap also make a nation fragile, in a way Donitz would have recognized immediately. The COVID pandemic of 2020 briefly showed the world what happens when shipping seizes up for even a few weeks. Empty shelves, fuel shortages, container ships anchored 100 deep off the coasts of Los Angeles and Rotterdam. That was a fraction of what Britain endured. For 4 straight years in the Atlantic, the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, walked ashore on food that had crossed the Atlantic in convoy, fuel that had crossed the Atlantic in convoy, ammunition and vehicles and medicine that had crossed the Atlantic in convoy. Every rifle round fired at a German bunker at Omaha Beach was there because a merchant seaman drowned somewhere in the North Atlantic, so that round could arrive. The visible war was the war on the beaches, the war in the desert, the war on the steppes of Russia. The invisible war was the war on the ocean. Wars are decided by the battles you can see, but they are won by the ones you cannot. The Atlantic was the quiet war, fought in cold water and cargo manifests, fought by men whose names never made the newsreels, whose faces never appeared on victory parade posters, whose graves are marked, if at all, by the coordinates of a lost ship. In the logbooks of the Admiralty, it was the longest battle of the Second World War. It was the battle that decided everything, and it was the battle most of us forgot to remember. If you found yourself thinking about a war you thought you knew, and realizing you knew almost none of it, then subscribe. There are more of these. Buried histories, battles we lost from memory, stories that decided the world we live in now. We tell them here.